How did you first hear of the tiny house movement?
Well, actually, it's interesting because Merete and I both had read the same article in Yes Magazine back in 2009, but we didn't even know each other yet, and so I think from there it was sort of ongoing. Every few months I would, oh, look at this tiny house, and for myself, and then.
Yeah, I remember reading an article in a magazine about it in 2009, and it was kind of this little seed in the back of my head, but the idea of actually going through with it and actually building a tiny house was not something I ever thought that I'd be involved with. And then it wasn't until 2011 when Christopher bought his land that it sort of, from there, kind of started becoming a reality.
Mm-hmm. So when you purchased the land, it was in your mind originally to build this tiny house, is that right?
Actually, so I've always sort of had this dream of buying some land in the mountains and having some sort of small cabin or something on it. And so when I bought the land, it was very kind of out of the blue. It was maybe a 3-day process from when I thought maybe it's time to buy some land to actually putting a contract in, and because that's how I do things apparently. So then the next step was, well, I want to use it, so how can I do that sooner than later instead of, waiting to build a large house? And I'm also an environmentalist, so I didn't want to build a large house. I wanted just a small place, like a little cabin kind of a feel. And so I started, weighing different options. And I remember tiny houses actually from the magazine article. And so the tiny house was actually it was the right solution for the sort of set of limitations I imposed on myself and that the location imposed. So it just worked out really well.
And the reason it became a tiny house was because Christopher's county, Park County, like most counties, actually has a minimum house size built into the building codes of the county. So in order to legally build a house that you can sleep in, it has to be at least 600 square feet, which was just, to build a 600 square foot house, Christopher wouldn't have been able to do that himself, which was really important to him, and he just didn't really have the money to invest in that up front. So, so putting them on wheels built onto a flatbed trailer is a way to get around the building codes because it counts as a temporary structure. So that's why it kind of ended up being the extreme kind of tiny house on wheels.
Yeah, the building codes are probably the main reason, because I probably would have built, and this is, keep in mind, before the film, so I was just thinking about what the best structure on the land would be for, what I wanted, and I at the time was thinking, 300 square feet sounds about right to me, and which is still really small, but it ended up going smaller to fit on the trailer, and the thing too about doing it to building codes is a lot of people don't realize this probably until they build a house, but codes increase the cost of construction quite a bit because they have. At that altitude, it's at 9,500 feet. The footings for the foundation have to be 12 feet in the ground. So there's no way I could dig that by hand and pour the cement myself. So it just, the costs start adding up, and then it becomes this project that I can't even really take on myself. So, so the tiny house actually just seemed like the right fit because it was in line with all the sort of my values and the dream that I had to do this project. So.
And is that the reason then the end result is the money that the county or whomever ends up getting because of building a small structure? Is that the reason why 600 square feet is the minimum, do you think?
Yeah, there's different kind of, we've interviewed a lot of people who have sort of different views on the building codes and things like that. The consensus is that, building codes definitely are a little bit outdated for what is needed right now, but that, there are theories that, property taxes are based on square footage, so it's a way for counties to keep the tax base up, is what some people say. Other people say that it has to do with kind of like the mortgage lobby and, things like that. Other people...
That they were, sorry, that the codes were originally kind of written in partnership with the building industry and the mortgage industry because both of those industries gain a lot from having larger structures being built. So,
and we have talked to a lot of people who will say, building codes are necessary to preserve safety and to preserve, health and things like that, but that they really do just need to be updated because they're a little bit antiquated right now.
Yeah, the other sort of cynical view is that people are opposed to, or towns are opposed to tiny houses because it brings down the property values of larger houses that they might be located next to. Although some Jay Schaefer from Tumbleweed Tiny House Company says that the research actually shows that a nice tiny house doesn't have that impact, and that sometimes it can have the opposite impact. So there's different views on the usefulness and sort of the cause of the housing codes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes along with just the whole cultural mentality, which I think is shifting, as a result of the housing crisis and things like that. But just the idea that you want a bigger house if you can afford it, and that if you have a small house, it's because you can't afford to have a bigger house, and it's somehow kind of embarrassing to have a small house. But I think that's changing.